History remembers the uniforms, the parades, the iron filings drawn to a single terrible magnet. It remembers the guns. It forgets the hands that sifted dust for older powers. Among the many departments that served the Reich, one was a quiet obsession, a bureau that collected myths, the way others collected borders. They called it a research institute, a cultural foundation, an expeditionary school. Those who worked inside called it something else, the room where the map touched the dark. From that room in the spring of 1942, a sealed order left Berlin without fanfare. It was addressed to a man named Klaus Ritter, a captain whose commendations spoke of mountain warfare and unspectacular obedience. His orders were not to capture a pass or sabotage a rail line. They were to retrieve a thinking tool. Legends called it many names: the wise ring, the seal, the king's knot. In the older texts, it was not a ring at all, but a union geometry paired to metal, an arrangement that bound unruly intelligences to purpose. The stories claimed King Solomon used it to number what could not be numbered: voices of wind, angels, the appetite of dawn. If a ruler could place that seal upon the world would answer like a servant. The Reich did not want gold. It wanted answers that never ended. The target was inconveniently distant. The name of the place was its first and worst coincidence: the Solomon Islands, a broken green necklace cast across the western Pacific. Soldiers snorted at the pun. The men in the room did not. The directive argued that enslaved empires mislaid their most valuable objects in maritime corners for safekeeping. An Arab pilot's chart from the 13th century contained a symbol at a latitude that matched a reef line in the eastern Solomons. A missionary ledger from the 1870s complained of a taboo valley where no mirror would keep its face. A German trader went missing there in 1906. His cabin contained a notebook crowded with hexagrams and a single phrase, written over and over, "Not here below." Ritter's unit was small: a radio man who had worked with polar teams, a medic with clever hands, 2 sailors transferred from a U-boat for shore practice, a linguist with the pale stare of a man who preferred books to people, an ethnography whose specialty was recording vanishing languages. He had learned to listen between words. On paper, they were a survey detachment tasked with mapping coastlines. In the hold of their seaplane lay the truth: a crate of chisels and brushes, a portable generator, a hand-cranked camera, and a case lined with velvet for the thing they believed they would find. They refueled from a submarine under a moon that looked like a bone, then skimmed above black water until dawn turned each wave into hammered pewter. They landed in a lagoon so clear the coral looked like a painted floor. Men in outrigger canoes watched from the shade, their chief broad-shouldered, hair tied back with fiber. Eyes like dusk listened as the interpreter made careful phrases and oblique gifts. He spoke in return with a kindness that had an edge. "Not inland," he said. "Not the valley with the old stone. Not the place where voices try to wear you." The interpreter chose softer words when he translated, but the sense remained. The chief drew 2 spirals in the sand, touching at a single point. "Sea and land," the ethnography murmured. A crossing. The radio man noted that compasses behaved strangely after noon. The medic said it was the heat. The sailors shrugged and checked their knives. Ritter thanked the chief with tins of meat and a mirror. The chief returned the mirror at once. It was not a refusal. It was a warning. The trail into the interior was a humid corridor of green. Ferns brushed their knees. Cicadas stitched a bright, incessant sound into the air. The ethnography marked the trunks with chalk. The linguist took notes when the local guide refused to step past a line of stones furred with moss. "Taboo," the guide said simply, and left them with a water gourd and a look that wished them no harm and no luck. The valley was not a valley so much as a sink in the island's spine. Trees leaned away from the center. Birds circled it without entering. The ground changed underfoot from soil to a skin of basalt scattered with shell. And there, at last, they found it. A platform of fitted stones, older than any church they had ever seen, not because of its wear, but because it looked as if it had always been exactly that shape. In its center lay a dish of black rock, polished to a depth that ate light. Around its rim ran an incised geometry that looked at first like a star, and then, as the sun moved, like something that had more sides than a star should. The ethnography muttered a prayer in his first language. The linguist shook and laughed at the same time. Ritter directed the camera to begin its slow, hungry clicking. The medic set up the generator. The radio man cranked open the aerial and sent back a first message that sounded like a telegram someone had already read. They documented. They measured. They said things like remarkable and intact. Even their caution felt like bravado's cousin. The stone dish held a ring of bronze fused to the basalt. Not a finger ring, not something a man could wear, but a thick torus the size of a ship's wheel, sunk so deeply into the rock that it seemed to have grown there. Its surface was plain except where it wasn't, a fine, almost invisible line of etching that ran along its inner diameter like a thought carried too far. That night, the sailors woke gasping from a dream they couldn't describe, except to say it tasted like metal shavings. The ethnography recorded a lullaby in a language he did not know, then refused to listen to his own recording. The radio man sent another message. It was longer and contained less. On the fourth day, the linguist put his thumb against the bronze and whispered a word that made the hairs on every arm lift. The word was older than Hebrew and younger than dirt. He did not know why he knew it. He said it again, softer. The bronze warmed. Ritter did what he had come to do. He ordered them to break the union. They worked as if delicate work could persuade fate to be gentle. The chisels kissed the edge of the bronze and died. The generator growled. The medic's hands were patient. Even patience failed. A hairline crack appeared where the bronze met the black stone. A seam in a world that had no business coming apart. The radio man reported a change in the air like static that had weight. Trees in the valley's ring leaned further back. Birds found other places to be. When the ring finally rose groaning, reluctant, a tooth drawn from a jaw that wasn't done biting, the wind stopped. Not slowed, stopped. Silence stepped down into the valley like a king descending a stair. In that silence they heard what men always hear when there is no sound at all, their own blood and something waiting behind it. At first, the price was small. The sailors developed blisters that did not burst. The ethnographer's hearing went in and out, as if his skull were a poorly tuned radio. The generator wouldn't start at night. The camera, which never complained, began to whisper to itself when no one touched it, the faintest rasp of film moving across teeth. Then the hills began to speak back. It is not music when stone answers. It is not words when something patient tries on your name. The radio man recorded a transmission that no one sent, a message that was in his voice but did not remember his childhood properly. The linguist, whose job was to put speech into cages, wrote a sentence that made the paper curl. The work continued. Men at war learned to call the unnatural weather. They hoisted the bronze ring onto the velvet-lined case. The linguist sat with it, muttering. The ethnography stood with his hands clenched so tightly that his palms bled. Ritter, who believed in orders more than gods, believed harder. Their first casualty was not dramatic. The medic failed to wake up. His face was calm. His heartbeat had simply gone somewhere else and kept going. They buried him with a line from a book. He had forgotten to finish and a promise. None of them believed. They decided to leave. The valley did not agree. On the hike back to the coast, the path moved. Chalk marks were where they should be, and also somewhere else. The air pressed on them with a gentle, steady hand. When they reached the lagoon, the water reacted to their presence, like a pane of glass fogging under breath. The canoe men, who had watched with kindness sharpened into fear, put their paddles down and did not pick them up again. The chief arrived without being called. He looked at the velvet case and the men who had carried it and the space behind them, where the forest now held its leaves very still. He said 2 words the interpreter could not translate, and then, in a language Ritter did know, he said, "There is a door where you pulled your treasure. It is not our door. You did not close it." The team tried to leave that afternoon. The seaplane lifted, fought something they could not measure, and settled back into the lagoon like an apologetic bird. The second time the engine coughed and the propeller turned the wrong way. The third time they did not try. They camped on the beach and took turns not sleeping. The last entry in the camera is a horizon that won't hold still, and men moving through the frame at a speed that does not match their bodies. There is a sound, but not a scream. Screams are tidy. This is a shape in the air. The film ends with the lens pointing at the water. It is a mirror. It does not show them. The rest is missing. The war moved on. The papers that should have been stamped were buried in a different kind of mud. Ritter's name appears once more in an inventory as a line crossed out. The ethnography's village received a letter that said regretted to inform. The radio man's mother kept a room for him until she didn't. The chief taught the children of his island. The old warning with new urgency. 79 years later, a cyclone peeled back the coastline like a scab. A ridge of coral that had been asleep decided to show its back. A graduate student scrolling satellite images at 3 in the morning noticed a pattern that looked like architecture, or at least an argument. She emailed a supervisor who had gone to bed at midnight and woke to the kind of message that makes a career or ends one. The survey team that arrived was a mixture of competence and hope. Dr. Lena Krause, whose grandparents had left Germany and never told her, why they didn't speak about certain cousins. Dr. Iosefa Tavai, who could smell rain 2 hours before anyone else, and had the patient courtesy of people who listened to land for a living. Rafi, a drone pilot whose hand-eye coordination was the kind of luck you don't say out loud. Maya Collins, the grad student who had seen a geometry and pixel noise and felt it seeing her back. They came with permits and respectful letters and gifts that weren't mirrors. The elders gave them permission to work as long as they stayed out of the interior valley. The warning was not shouted. It didn't have to be. The ridge yielded history like a stubborn tooth yields blood. The team found the seaplane's fuel drums, colonized by coral. They found a tangle of aluminum and bone so fused it had become a single story. They found a tin box with a corroded emblem stamped into its lid and inside it. Under oilcloth, pages in a cramped hand that thought ink could make sense of the world. The handwriting belonged to a man who had recorded lullabies in a dozen languages and finally met one he couldn't carry. Maya read aloud, careful, as if each word had an edge. Lines about a platform of fitted stone, a ring welded to black rock, silence walking. She did not read the sentence that made the paper curl. She put that page back and looked at the water, which was lying very still as if listening. Rafi sent the drone inland once. The feed came back normal for 20 seconds, and then, without drama, the sky rotated like a coin. When the drone returned, its gyroscope reported having briefly lived upside down. That night, a wind came off the sea that was not on anyone's forecast. It moved the palms and then did not. The sound cut out in a way that made each person become aware of the noise they themselves made. Dr. Tavai said a prayer quietly, and nobody asked him to translate it. Dr. Kraus sat with the tin box and the pages and the line, where her family tree went pale. Maya looked at the map she had printed, with the valley marked in pencil and circled as a place to avoid, and realized the circle was a mirror. In the morning, the lagoon had a skin. You could press a palm against it and feel it give, refusing to break. Fish swam under the idea of water. The elders came down to the shore and did not look at the foreigners when they spoke. Not inland, they repeated. Not the valley with the old stone. Not the place where voices try to wear you. Maya slept during the heat and dreamed a ring large enough to live inside. On its inner edge, someone had cut a line, so fine it could have been a crack or a promise. She woke with the word for balance in her mouth and the taste of metal. She and Dr. Kraus argued without raising their voices. The scientific impulse is a muscle. If you don't use it, it trembles anyway. They agreed to approach the interior not to disturb but to confirm a boundary. Dr. Tavai refused to go, not from fear, but from completion. I have already seen what I need, he said in a tone so even it sounded like law. They left at noon with water and a plan to be back by 2. The forest received them. The chalk on the trees appeared in places no chalk had been. The path descended as if the island had learned a new verb. When they reached the ring of trees that leaned away from the center, the air had the tempered brightness of a church before a funeral. The platform was there, so was the dish of black stone. The bronze ring was not. In its place was the absence of a thing shaped like a circle. a fine seam inscribed into the rock that drew the eye and then led it somewhere. The eye did not consent to go. Maya put her palm out and then pulled it back. Her hand remembered the lagoon and the way surface could pretend to be depth. Dr. Krauss took a photograph and found that the camera recorded a different arrangement of light than the one her eye admitted. In the frame, the shadows converged on the dish like spokes to a weight. There were marks on the stone no lichen had made, characters that had never chosen an alphabet. She recognized none of them, and then, horribly, recognized all of them. They were shapes you get when you let geometry do what it wants in a room without corners. Maya heard a lullaby. It was not the sound of a voice. It was the shape of one. She could almost make out a word that began with a breath. She did not say it. They left. That was the plan. Leave the center untouched. Leave with the knowledge that something should be left. The island did not agree. On the way out, the world turned very slightly to one side. It felt like stepping from a curb you didn't know existed. Dr. Krauss put a hand out to steady herself and touched a tree that was not there and also was. Raffi, following the GPS track on his handheld, discovered that the breadcrumb trail had begun to eat itself. When they reached the beach, the water had lost its skin and stood up. It stood with a politeness that was not mercy. The elders had already gathered. The chief's grandson, who wore a t-shirt from a band he had never heard, said gently, "The old balance had a keeper. You met the absence of the keeper. Can it be closed?" Maya asked, but the question felt like a child's toy in a courtroom. "Doors are for us," the old man said, almost kindly. "That is not a door." That night, the wind returned, and with it, a weight in the air like an ear pressed too hard to a shell. The team slept in the open with lamps that made circles that did not feel safe. Sometime after midnight, Dr. Krauss woke to the sound of Raffi speaking softly to someone who wasn't there. His voice was calm, asking questions as if he were trying to charm the answers out of a fact. She couldn't hear the other voice. She could feel it. She sat up but did not call his name. You do not interrupt a person in conversation when the conversation is not happening where you are. She watched the plane of the lagoon become briefly convex and then settle. When she checked on Raffi at dawn, he was asleep sitting up, hands open, eyes wet. He did not remember the questions he had asked or the answers he had heard. He did not fly the drone that day or any day after. Maya read more of the tin box pages and found herself humming the lullaby she had sworn not to keep. The page that had curled would not lie flat. The words on it seemed to move when the light changed. She put it back exactly the way she had found it, and still it was not where she had left it. On the third morning, a boat arrived, unannounced, a caved-in aluminum, hull patched with love and fear. The men in it wore their hats like apologies. They brought another box wrapped in fiber and sealed with wax. The old man watched their faces and the way they sat. They boxed down a ceremony of fatigue. "It was in the interior," the grandson said softly. "Long ago. They did not open it. They carried it here. They asked the sea to hold it. The sea does not wish to hold it anymore." Maya did not breathe while Dr. Krauss looked at the seal. The wax was old and perfect. The stamp showed a star that was not a star and the idea of a crown. It was the kind of seal official papers where, when they want you to believe, the elders asked them to take it away, not to open, the old man said, as if this were within anyone's power, to take the weight off the path between our houses and the place that is not our house. There are moments when a person's crawling, and their caution hold hands and jump anyway. The team agreed to remove the box and never to open it. They documented the agreement. They filmed the signatures. They sealed their own promises with tape and words. When they lifted the box, the air said nothing, which was worse than speech. The sea accepted their boat. The engine behaved. The horizon held. On the second day, far enough from any island that trees were a rumor, the boat's radio woke itself. It produced a voice that belonged to the dead radio man, and a message that had never been sent. You did not close it. Underneath, barely audible, the lullaby hummed its patient line. Dr. Teva took off his hat and did not put it back on. "We are carrying a boundary," he said. "We should not confuse distance with safety." They made landfall on an island with an airstrip and bureaucracy. Papers were stamped. The box was placed in a crate, and the crate in a cargo hold. The hold flew across the ocean to a city where concrete behaves like belief. It moved through rooms that made it more official and less understood. Finally, in a basement that had once been a bank vault and now was a museum's pride, the box sat on a table under lights that made everything look righteous. A conservator read the notes that said, "Do not open." A curator read the line about an unprecedented artifact associated with the Solomonic cycle and thought about donors. An administrator read the words, 79 years and calculated press releases. Maya sat on the stairs and felt the lullaby at the edge of her hearing and wished she had never learned to listen well. At midnight, the alarm in the vault went off and then stopped itself. The cameras recorded nothing. In the morning, the conservator swore she had not touched the seal, and the seal looked slightly different in the way. A person looks different when you know their name. The crate felt heavier with the lid open. The box felt lighter with the lid closed. In the screenshots of the vault, if you are the kind of person who looks at screenshots for too long, you can see a distortion at the leftmost edge of the frame where light refuses to complete its task. It is the shape of a ring and the shape of an absence. If you listen to the alarm's recorded tone, slowed by a factor of 100, there is a pattern concealed in the siren, a geometry trying to be sound. The museum issued a statement about conservation, protocols, and cultural sensitivity. It shipped the box to a facility where difficult things are kept until they become easy. The elders on the island noticed that fish returned to the lagoon. The path into the interior did not feel quite so steep. The chief's grandson slept without hearing his own name spoken back to him. The lullaby receded the way a tide recedes when a moon looks elsewhere. Maya went home and turned all her mirrors to face the walls. Dr. Krauss wrote the first paragraph of an article she never finished. Dr. Tavai walked his land at dusk and thanked it for staying itself. Raffi bought a plant that liked indirect light and felt better. In the museum's facility, in a room where white gloves are the rule and air is a measurable thing, the box sits. The seal holds. The lights hum. Once, in the deepest part of the night when even the hum is too loud, A camera catches a brief failure of reflection in the glass of a nearby display. For a second, the case shows not the room but a valley, where trees lean away from the center and birds find other places to be. What happens next depends on people who think they are not part of the story. They will decide whether a promise is a lock or a dare. They will decide whether to open what should only be carried. They will not know they are stepping from a curb they can't see. The reports from 1942 end with a horizon and a sound that had a shape. The notes from the present day end with a seal that looks back. The old legends say that every balance has a keeper, and every keeper has a price. The men who came for wisdom found the bill. The ones who found their bones found the arithmetic. Doors are for us. Some thresholds are not. If you need proof, look closely at the last frame of the old camera, the one that died with its eye to the water. The surface holds not a reflection, but an intention. It is not ours. It is not the island's. It is the patient insistence of something that does not mind waiting a century for someone to ask the wrong, question the right way. And if someday someone decides to break the wax because light looks like permission, remember the chief's words in their translation that wasn't. There is a place where voices try to wear you. You can dress in many things and call it power. You should not let power wear you back.